This is a Course in Miracles. It is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what you want to take at a given time. The course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. The opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. This course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. This is A Course in Miracles, a reading from Chapter 8, The Journey Back. Section 1, The Direction of the Curriculum. Knowledge is not the motivation for learning this course. Peace is. This is the prerequisite for knowledge only because those who are in conflict are not peaceful. And peace is the condition of knowledge because it is the condition of the kingdom. Knowledge can be restored only when you meet its conditions. This is not a bargain made by God, who made no bargains. It is merely the result of your misuse of his laws on behalf of an imaginary will that is not his. Knowledge is his will. If you're opposing his will, how can you have knowledge? I have told you that knowledge offers you. I have told you what knowledge offers you, but perhaps you do not yet regard this as wholly desirable. If you did, you would not be so ready to throw it away when the ego asks for your allegiance. I'm going to go on. The distractions of the ego may seem to interfere with your learning, but the ego has no power to distract you unless you give it the power to do so.
Wait, now you stop. There's a paragraph there. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, what do you hear it saying about knowledge? I mean, knowledge. I'm going to say right off the top that it says that we don't understand what knowledge is because we think knowledge is data.
Yes.
We think knowledge is information.
I agree.
It's not saying, it's saying that knowledge, you know you have knowledge if you have peace.
Yes.
Now, that's absolutely contrary to the way we usually view what it means to have knowledge. He's a man of knowledge. Usually that means you know many things and your brain works in a sort of an analytical way.
Yeah.
This is saying you have peace. And the only way that you can have peace is that if you're sharing God's mind. If you're sharing God's mind, you have access to whatever, whether it's information or moods or reactions or responses, whatever, you're in contact when you're in peace. You're in peace with, you're in peace and you're in communion with the mind of God. And when you're in communion with the mind of God, you have access to whatever you require. It's not like, well, I know 4 languages, but I just happen to go to Hungary and I don't know Hungarian. It's not that kind of knowledge where there might be a gap in it. The knowledge the Course is talking about is a complete knowledge. And the only way that you can know knowledge, meaning a skill set, tools, access, proper responses, skillful means for whatever situation you're in, because you're tapped into the source of all those situations.
I agree 100%.
Like that.
That's exactly it. And also, knowledge is equated with his will. It says knowledge is his will, and that's one little sentence in there. And if you're opposing his will, how can you have knowledge? So, that's really important to recognize that will and knowledge and peace are in a oneness of God. You have all of it at the same time. That's the interesting thing about having any one in completeness it seems as if you have all. You have knowledge of God, you have knowledge, not just knowledge of God, but the knowledge of God is available to you. Peace of God is available to you. All of it seems to be available at the same time, and all of it is His will. What do you say about that?
Well, the only thing I was going to say is that, that true to so many things in the Course, can be taken two ways. You can say knowledge is His will. In other words, God wills for me to have knowledge, like that. I can have that as one interpretation, but I don't think that's what it means. I think that what it means is God's will is knowledge itself.
That's right.
Will and knowledge are the same thing.
Yes, that's what I was saying.
So that if I have peace, that means I'm tapped into God's will, which is the same thing as
God's knowledge.
Knowledge. So that what we call knowledge is a shadow. Anyway, it's a contemplation, and you have to get a grip on it. You have to get a grip to realize that there's a world to where you can respond appropriately to a situation with no other preparation other than being contemplative, to be in communion with the mind of God. You can have the skillful means required. And what does that mean? It's like, let's say I don't know this Hungarian, and I'm in Hungary. It means you just so happens, because of God's will and knowledge, an interpreter shows up.
Yeah.
Or things happen to be put in a language I understand. It's not, the miracle of it is...
Also the ability to read a person's expressions.
Yeah.
You use all these things that suddenly there's another understanding that comes through, whether it's a smile, a grunt, or whatever. You're interpreting your world on a more basic level, but knowledge is there available to you. If you're one with God, then you'd recognize your brother, and communication flows across all means, I think, at that moment.
Well, and what's great about that scenario is that then you don't, it does not, there's no self-aggrandizement. There's no building up of the ego. Like, aren't I talented?
Right.
Because I'm so prepared for every situation. No, it's like, no, I'm invulnerable. And with or without preparation, it's always difficult. Think about prepping. What are you going to do? Prep for an atom bomb? What are you going to do? Or what are you going to prep for? Bad water, an atom bomb, starvation, political upheaval. What are you going to prep for? All you can do is buy cans of soup.
Right.
And that doesn't cover everything.
No, it will not.
And knowledge is that. Well, our interpretation of knowledge is that way.
I agree.
And so what you're saying is that when I go into a situation, it releases joy.
Yeah.
Because you're in a situation where, wow, I didn't know, but providentially, it worked out. And it releases joy and not egoic building up.
Yeah, I would say that anytime you enter into a foreign country or whatever, where you are literally a foreigner on foreign lands, it tends to be that way. Even if you know some of the language, you're interpreting your world not from a language space anymore. It comes from someplace else. And also guidance also comes from another place. There seems to be, because you open yourself up to that, and I know that you've had this too, there tends to be more, quote, synchronicities, because you're not using your preparation, your knowledge of a situation to get you through something. It comes from somewhere else. It's just that we're so used to having knowledge come in the form of what I learned on paper, what I learned because I was there before, what I learned and all that kind of stuff, that we don't use that aspect of sort of letting the universe speak to us and come to us to answer what we're already asking to have done, whether it's to find the hotel or whatever it is in the situation. It just seems to come together if you're open. I think you've experienced that as well, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess what's stuck in my mind is the way it can work in the opposite direction. Which was interesting. I as you were talking.
Well, if you're fearful, as soon as fear, there's no room for the synchronicities to work in your benefit. So it requires, again, in all situations, no matter how simplistic, in my understanding and experience, that you have to have a suspended moment so that the answer can come in.
Well, this is what happened. Okay, I was in college. It was, this work study type thing. And I was in Guatemala. And actually I was in Tikal, which is where the temples are. The Mayan temples are there. And I'm, at this point, just quite still dogmatically in my Catholic framework. And just, in other words, I'm going to get myself to a church no matter where I am, no matter what time of day, no matter what. And if I just have to go to the church and go up front and light a vigil light, I'm going to do it. Okay, through my will, am going to stay on the Catholic straight and narrow somehow or another, is what I was thinking. And so I ask these people, where's the church? They point out the church. Nobody speaks English. It looks like a haunted house. It's dark. There's no lights anywhere. It looks like it hadn't been used since the Mayans went away. and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going, oh my gosh! I go in the church. I open the door tenuously. I'm surprised that behind the door, in the dark, I see the light falls upon. There's two kids. There's two children in there, and it's like quite freaky. And when they see me there, they turn around. They go, "Mira," which means look. And they hold up a bat.
Oh my God!
Each kid is holding one wing of the bat, and the bat is trying to bite their fingers. I'm going, okay, wait a second. I go into a Catholic church to say my little prayer, and instead I'm in this haunted house, with this bat. It's like the personification of evil here. And so, what I'm saying about that is, the reason I bring up the story is, I go there with a sense of will that I'm going to maintain my, I don't know what, sanctity or dogmatic rightness or whatever it is. It's the family I grew up in, it's the way we were. And so I'm going to do that thing. And instead, I find the absolute opposite of what I was looking for. The opposite of what I was looking for. And as you're reading that, I'm thinking about it, I go, is that a message? It is, of some kind. I don't think it's to see Jesus in the bat.
No.
No, I think it's saying, in a way, the way I received it and the way it functioned for me was, hey man, give up. You don't know where you are.
Yeah.
You don't know the circumstance you're in. And your little magical, scenario of some guy in a cassock burning incense and lighting candles on an altar is not happening here at the foot of the Mayan temple. Something else is going on here, so just back off. You don't know where you are. And so I did back off, and I think that again is the way knowledge works in terms of understanding who even in the superficial way, understanding who I am. Okay, I'm some white guy. I'm surrounded.
But who you are is a child of God,
right? But me and the Germans and whatnot that took the plane in to see the temples and tromp around in there. We don't know. We have our entitlements. Because really, if I really examine it honestly from this perspective, it's a form of entitlement that I think that because I want to be right with this dogmatic understanding of religion, God, whatever, that somehow that's the miracle. It's almost like the waters of the Red Sea will part before me.
Right. And so, I mean, going back to this paragraph that we read on knowledge and will, I would say that you were outside of the knowledge and will of God at that moment.
Oh, it's deeply in my own will.
Yeah, you were.
Which is why it turned out the way it did.
Exactly, which is the point. Really, it's the only point that needs to be made, is that when we are in our own will, under those circumstances, it's not going to turn out to be. Well, it's just not going to feel like joyful, peaceful, or like that things. It's going to you're going to experience a little afraid.
Well, and I'm going to say that the last part of it, to me, is to understand. It seems like I've said this so many times, that what I am, as seen in God's eyes, is absolutely dynamic. Right. It's not a fixed entity. Mm-hmm. It's not that there's no place for patterns, like looking for a church. Mm-hmm. It's not that there's no place for that. It's just that there's really, in a way, there's not really a place. Put it this way: there's a place where dogmatism leaves off. Mm-hmm. Dogmatism comes to die at the true dynamic understanding of what you are. Dogmatism, which I tend towards dogmatism. Yeah, I grab a hold of a rigid pattern, and I will do it, sort of come hell or high water type thing. Right. And I consider that a virtue, but it's a constant learning that I'm not here for that. I'm here to live. I'm not here to execute my dogmatic patterns and then say how great I am, because look at what I did, and other people are slouches, man, and they can't hang on to their dogmatic patterns.
That every priest, every cardinal, every bishop has to go through that if they are to be a true teacher of God, all the pomp and circumstance that goes with their station in life has to fall away if they're going to be a true teacher of Christ.
No, the other side of it, though, is you can't disrespect dogma.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I don't care what kind of outfits they put on and everything else. It's just that sometimes they identify so much with what the outfit that they have on, and not the station in which they are supposed to be one with God, that the pomp makes them lose what they're up to. I actually like all the stuff of what the Catholic Church does, because I grew up with it and things like that as well. But recognizing that whenever you're crowning somebody, whenever you're giving somebody a station of power, that they themselves need to recognize with this power comes a great responsibility. And I just feel as though there's been, and when it comes to those kinds of things, there's been abuses of power in every station of life right now. All across the board, whether it's politics, education, and the church and things like that. So it's when it comes to knowledge and the will of God, it's an internal process for every single one of us. Recognition of it comes from when we feel and know the peace of God. That is His will. And there's many times in the Course that it tells you what God's will is. And my understanding of it is that if you have one, you will have all of them, because you're experiencing you're experiencing God's will for you in that moment, which is inclusive, because God is all. As soon as you enter into that all space, peace returns, a sense of upliftment in your heart, a sense of joy returns, a sense of knowledge, of understanding everything about you returns. It's all encompassing, and it comes in at once. So to me, that is the nature of that. And when I want my will, things will definitely be in the normal human way, where some things go okay and some things don't go okay and stuff like that. Because we apply our will to everything in life, including just like washing the dishes or something, or going for a walk. You have to will yourself out of the room, out of the house. But as we did the lessons and stuff like that, God goes with me everywhere I go. The more I remind myself that God is with me everywhere I go, the more I can tap into that if he is, and I'll shift my awareness and say, well, that means that if I'm truly in his will at this moment, I will know it through my inner nature. I will know it.
There's one other piece that I found, and I've got to throw this in there, even though it has nothing to do with the Course in Miracles. The idea of dharma. It brought so much peace and a sense of skillful means. Just the word dharma, to really understand, to go into it's the Sanskrit term for truth, for duty, for your station in life. It's all these things. Mm-hmm. And it operates at different levels. Like you have a swadharma, mm-hmm. Which is what me, as let's say a householder, a person who has to pay bills or who might take care of kids or might have a partner, these kinds of things. That person has certain roles and responsibilities. That's dharma. Yeah. Now, there's a swadharma, and then there's a higher dharma, and I don't know what actual term that is, where that would be Buddha, where he left all those behind. Mm-hmm. And a person has to be aware of the truth. It's a small truth, and also it taps into a larger truth of how you are in your station in life as a child of some parents, as a brother to siblings or a sister to siblings, as a worker in an organization, as a person in a community. There are certain roles that are called forth for me. Now, if I take them dogmatically, it can lead to problems. Like, I'm going to recycle no matter what. I'm going to do this no matter what. And, and I have a dogmatic. But I can't throw dogmatism or those roles and duties and responsibilities under the bus. And, now that's the problem with a problem with Buddhism. Not in broad terms, right? Is to go into a Western culture that's based on, let's say, nuclear families, and there's not a strong emphasis on a religious vocation type thing. And then that person says, "Hey, man, I'm Jack Kerouac. I'm on the road. I have my relationships. I'm serial monogamy. I don't have any structured life. I'm sort of a monk in my own mind." Mm-hmm. That can lead, that lack of structure, that lack of, I call it dogma, or the lack of an organized sense of dharma for the individual, can lead to a big fat mess where nothing can happen. You end up being in dead ends. Mm-hmm. You can't, we talked about that on this trip that we were on. But anyway, I kind of got far afield, and I guess my point being is that it's the difference between what I've always thought of as knowledge, which is just packing stuff in my head, versus the knowledge of being tapped into the dynamic reality of God present in me as a creature.
Correct. Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. Okay. And paragraph 2, the distractions of the ego may seem to interfere with your learning, but the ego has no power to distract you unless you give it the power to do so. The ego's voice is an hallucination. You cannot expect to say, "I am not real." Yet you are not asked to dispel your hallucinations alone. You're merely asked to evaluate them in terms of their results to you. If you do not want them on the basis of loss of peace, they will be removed from your mind for you. So that's the end of that paragraph. And so obviously the distractions of the ego, it's always there to distract, and it's always there to give you the sense that of self-knowledge, like knowing. And in the spiritual world, there's self-righteousness. There's, well, I studied everything and I know these things and I'm going to preach it and everything else. And there's that makes me somehow better than somebody else. So because I've gained this knowledge, that is all ego world. That's not where the knowledge of God is.
Well, an ego, okay, what is an ego in a lot of sense? Like there's a book called, I think it's something like that by Julian Jaynes or something, the Growth of Human Consciousness and the Bicameral Mind or something. It's kind of a cult favorite of some people about the way human beings even developed a cognitive sense of an ego as a separate thing. He makes the argument that people had a tribal mind and that prior to some great global conflagration, that people had a sense of being members of a tribe or a family. In other words, that dharma that I was talking about was the overriding sense of what they were. I am a warrior. I am a woman. I am a wife and mother. I do this in the tribe. This is my role. And you don't really have a sense, according to Julian Jaynes, I'm not, dreaming this up. You don't really have, those people they did not have at that point in history, say, 10,000 BC or something like that, or 8,000 BC. They didn't have a sense of being any kind of an individual with an individual voice. And Julian Jaynes argues that because of the global conflagration, that people really went through a trauma, a deep cultural trauma, where they ended up hearing the voice of an individual self because their societies were ripped loose from their contexts and their environments. Their gods became irrelevant. They had clashes with other tribal states and cultures they weren't prepared for. And so there was a huge mixture of people there was no preparation for it. And they all kind of got stirred together in a pot. And that when that happened, they started hearing things. And that thing that they were hearing was their own inner voice. And it was a survival mechanism. And that's what we call our ego. And now every single person is sort of addicted to that voice. And we are in a broken culture.
Right.
Those voices shouting separately cannot lead to a coherent culture.
Yeah, it won't,
they can't.
And it won't lead to peace. It'll lead to division, constant division. The one other thing that I wanted to mention here is that in this particular paragraph, when it says that the ego's voice is an hallucination, and yet the Course also says you cannot expect to say, I am not real, yet you are not asked to dispel your hallucinations alone. So this teaching recognizes that there's no way for me to just discount how I experience my world. It's not possible. That's where the body sense is. That's where my ego sense is and everything else. What it is asking is that you're merely asked to evaluate them, these hallucinations, these voices that you're speaking of, in terms of the results to you. What is it bringing to you? Is there any happiness there? Is there any peace there? Is there any joy? Is there any fulfillment that is long-lasting? Or is it just a moment-by-moment pleasure or pain situation that's going on? That will determine which voice that you're listening to. The still small voice, which is the voice of God, or the voice of the ego, which leads to conflict, confusion, upset, and things like that. I think that's the overall message. And you'll know by your state of being which voice that you're listening to.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, and again, there's that painful moment when when I become a frightened animal in a corner, that I'm reduced to that, and that I barely have recourse to a coherent thought because of a fear. Like, let's say my heart is going, like beating 250 beats a minute or something, and I can't do anything about it. It leads to fear thoughts. If I, feel a strange pain somewhere that I shouldn't be there, or if I get a weird letter from somebody that's very ominous with its implications, all that can throw me into a panic state. And I at that point, it's almost like I get taken over by the darkest version of the ego scrambling and trying to maintain control of a situation.
Yeah.
Call it panic attack, that it has lost control of. The Course is saying, always below that, there is the voice for God. Always below that is the possibility of tapping the Holy Spirit. And within that, there's this sense of grace, and as we discussed in other places, depending on practice, the voice for God or the Holy Spirit can somehow break through in a miraculous manner and get you some control back over your crazy trained animal self that's just eyes darting, panting, cotton mouth.
And, there's no way in this world, being that we are sensate beings, to avoid those places of fear. And even in the Bible and everything else, there's kings and things that cry out to God because of their enemies at their back. And at that moment, that is the release. There's nothing in here that says you should not ask for help. It does, please ask for help. That's why you do not do it alone.
And let's say you ask for help, right? You ask for help, and you are led to the bitter moment, and you say, God did not show up. The Holy Spirit did not help. And you leap and you act. Chances are pretty good that action will be the answer. I don't mean to be la la land or magical thinking, but sometimes action out of that, just pure action out of that sense of panic. In other words, all I can do is act, and I feel that there's no one listening and I'm alone in this situation. I mean, that's what the whole Passion of Christ expresses.
Exactly, yeah.
That there's an action that you put out there after making the call, and there's a strong possibility that the voice for God will be revealed in retrospect, that it was in that action.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's that Los Huelos, whatever, the footsteps, that poem.
Oh, yeah.
Where I looked at the beach when I died, and there were these footprints, and I said, I noticed that, I called on God, I called on Jesus, and I looked and
there was
looked.
two, and then all of a sudden there's only one. There's only one set of footprints, and he says, well, that's when I carried you.
Yeah, right, at the worst time. Yeah, that's it. I carried you. So that whole thing is to interpret that when I make skillful actions in a difficult and panicked situation, that would be God's way of acting within me as personal empowerment.
Yeah.
And I didn't drum it up myself.
Yeah, no. I mean, because in that moment, and I think everyone has experienced them and everything else, is that moment when you're that afraid and you know that your will is not going to get you out of whatever this thing is. There's just a natural handing over of the situation that you don't even recognize that you've done it. In that moment, in that very moment, because the Course says it only takes an instant that you hand it over. So as soon as I say, there's nothing I can do here anymore. It doesn't mean your fear has gone away. You're as panicked as ever, but you realize that you're at a loss of how to get back control of the situation or anything else. At that moment, that release, that little bit of movement that says it's out of my hands, is the exact moment that God can come in and bring an answer to the situation.
Right, and when that happens, just as an aside, and that's an aside, it's actually, I think, a central point, is when that happens that you're talking about, and you know that God comes in, and it seems like it was an answer in the dark. when it's all over, you don't say, wow, I'm pretty good. That's wrong answer. It should be a sense of worship, prostration before.
Yeah, thank God.
Thank you, Jesus, kind of a thing. Where you've got to say, wow, there are forces beyond me that somehow recognize me as kindred, and that they hear that voice and act in these mysterious ways that I can't understand. It leads to a truly exalted sense of my own reality being richer than I thought it was in the first place, instead of just another merit badge because, I lucked out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
Anyway, that's what I found anyhow.
So we left off where the ego's voice is a hallucination, and you cannot expect to it to say, I'm not real, yet you are asked to dispel the hallucinations alone. You are not asked to dispel your hallucinations alone. You're merely asked to evaluate them in terms of the results to you. So from there, every response to the ego is a call to war. The war does not deprive you of peace. Okay, every response to the ego is a call to war, and war does deprive you of peace. I know I read that incorrectly. Yet, in this war, there is no opponent. This is the reinterpretation of reality that you must make to secure peace, and the only one you need to ever make. Those whom you perceive as opponents are part of your peace, which you are giving up by attacking them. How can you have what you give up? You share to have, but you do not give it up yourself. You share to have, but you do not give it up yourself. When you give up peace, you're excluding yourself from it. This is a condition so alien to the kingdom that you cannot understand the state that prevails within it.
Read that line again. It makes no sense.
I'm going to actually reread this whole paragraph because I felt like I wasn't really quite understanding it even myself. Every response to the ego is a call to war, and war does deprive you of peace. Yet in this war, there is no opponent. This is the reinterpretation of reality that you must make to secure peace, and the only one you need to ever make is the recognition that the ego is bringing you to a call to war, but there isn't really an opponent. The attack that you make is going to be upon yourself. Okay, so let me just reread this.
No, don't reread it. That's good. That's clear.
Those whom you perceive as opponents are part of your peace, which you are giving up by attacking them. How can you have what you are giving up? You share to have, but you do not give it up yourself. When you give up peace, you're excluding yourself from it. This is the condition so alien to the kingdom that you cannot understand the state that prevails within it.
So somehow or another, it's saying that if that I have this call to war, if I ever relax this is, sort of how I hear what it's saying. If I ever relax the ego's call to war and say, no, I'm in this by myself, which the Course says is the only thing I need to really come to that conclusion, is that there isn't really an opponent out there that's out to get me. War is the state that the ego has. It's just what it brings to every situation. And the reason the ego keeps that call to war intact is because if it ever relaxes, then it will be attacked, and it will give up its peace.
Yeah,
it can't share.
It loses its sense of self, so it needs to have. It's always in protection of what it perceives itself is.
So what the Course is calling the ego is, if the ego feels like if it gives peace to another, it's like it gave another $100. It loses it. Mm-hmm. It gave it away.
Right.
So if I give away peace to others, they'll have peace at my expense.
Yeah, that's exactly how the ego perceives it.
Okay,
yeah.
That's how I understand that.
Paragraph 4. Your past learning must have taught you the wrong things simply because it has not made you happy. On this basis alone, its value should be questioned. If learning aims at change, and that is always its purpose, are you satisfied with the changes your learning has brought you? Dissatisfaction with learning outcomes is a sign of learning failure, since it means that you did not get what you wanted. I'm going to continue reading because this is going to run. This is a very short paragraph. The curriculum of the atonement is the opposite of the curriculum you have established for yourself, but so is its outcome. If the outcome of yours has made you unhappy, and if you want a different one, a change in the curriculum is obviously necessary. The first change to be understood is a change in direction. A meaningful curriculum cannot be inconsistent. If it is planned by two teachers, each believing in diametrically opposed ideas, it cannot be integrated. If it is carried out by these two teachers simultaneously, each one merely interferes with the other. And just to clarify, it's calling the teacher of God versus the teacher that comes from the ego. This leads to fluctuation, but not to change. The volatile have to have no direction. They cannot choose one because they cannot relinquish the other, even if it does not exist. Their conflicted curriculum teaches them that all directions exist and gives them no rationale for choice. And I'm going to continue because this is all inclusive at this point. The total senselessness of such a curriculum must be fully recognized before a real change in direction becomes possible. You cannot learn simultaneously from two teachers who are in total disagreement about everything. Their joint curriculum presents an impossible learning task. They are teaching you entirely different things in entirely different ways, which might be possible except that both are teaching you about yourself. Your reality is unaffected by both, but if you listen to both, your mind will be split about what your reality is.
So if the two teachers being one, let's just give them terms, the Holy Spirit, or you could say Jesus Christ, you could say the voice for God, you could say the wisdom sense, is going to teach me in certain ways that are absolutely contrary to the apparent approach to life that has with where I get a hold of myself. I decide what I have to do in terms of career, daily efforts, exercise, diet, dealing with people, and it's all has a certain sort of a warlike attitude. It could, and if you don't have a warlike attitude, it could be a nihilistic attitude where I lost the war and that nothing I do matters. Either way, it all leads to inconsistency because you don't understand what consistency is, because the consistent mind of God led to an amazing array of diversity. All the plants and trees and flowers and life and death and all this kind of stuff is diverse. And that diversity sources from one wisdom voice. It's not like there's a bunch of crazy people leading to life, death, and the cycles of nature and whatnot. It's a unified and very consistent voice that you can trace back from the external world to hear the voice, to work it backwards from the diversity of my experience. And I can go back to hear what is unifying that deep inside of myself. The ego sometimes will look at it and say, well, there's a diversity of experience, and that requires a diversity of approaches. It requires, there's diet versus profession versus relationship. They're all different.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They're all different. Sometimes, somebody will say, well, when I'm at work, man, I'm at war with those guys, and I go home and I love my family and I'm together with them, or vice versa. I fight those that I love, but I suck up to those that I have to work with. Those kinds of things happen. That's inconsistency, and it's a misinterpretation that this is all coming from one voice, one source, if you take the time to try to understand what that is. And so that the idea with the Course, as far as I'm getting, is...
being that when there's inconsistency, it's from the ego.
Yeah.
You're running your whole life from your ego will.
I know from my own experience, I mean, it's not that hard to remember back, all the way back in my own life, to see that I definitely never thought of everything coming out of the same place. I mean, when I walked into a sixth grade classroom, that's totally different than my family.
Absolutely.
The strategies are different. Mm-hmm. And then when I go from the sixth grade classroom out to a basketball court to practice basketball, totally different. Yeah. Totally different. Mm-hmm. Run into a bully in a park, totally different. Every single one is so wildly different. And that just went on and on and on with me until my current life of being, so that, why? Because the culture is based on that schizophrenia.
Yeah.
The culture is based on schizophrenia. In fact, just as a symbol of it, just think about even back when I was having my difficulties in the sixth grade with the diversity of experience, there was only one pair of sneakers available, or two. There's the cheap ones, that you get at the dime store, and then there were Converse.
Yeah.
Converse All-Stars, Chuck Taylor signature. That's all.
Yeah.
Now, look at how that developed. Now you go into the shoe store, Foot Locker, and there's like, are there 250 pairs of shoes possible?
Yeah, under one name, whether Nike or Adidas or whatever.
It used to be you'd get in your closet and throw on your sneakers, and you either played basketball or tennis or went for a run. Now you've got 2 different pairs of shoes for each of those activities. That's a symbol. Mm-hmm. That's of the shattering of our mind into so many different specialties.
I agree.
With no unification whatsoever.
Right. So mostly this whole section is an intro to the direction of this curriculum. And the direction of the curriculum is to recognize the senselessness of listening to 2 voices. You have to make a decision for the one voice. In fact, almost all throughout the Course of Miracles, there is the decision for the kingdom of God. There's the decision for peace. There's the decision for joy. There's specific lessons with each of these, and all of them lead to the same place. They all lead to listening with not your ears. It's an inner voice. It's an inner understanding that comes to you when that wave of peace or joy or whatever comes over a person. Then you're listening to the voice for God, and it doesn't tell you in words what needs to come up. It just means that once you enter the state that it's speaking of, that you're open and available for the answers to come through as you walk through your life. I think that's really the main thing, whereas the ego is going to plan out every piece of the stage of what it needs to be up to and say, look at what a good boy am I, if it turns out good. And then, oh my God, I could not have anticipated that. And the whole thing went to heck, So is there anything else you want to add to that?
No. It hinges on judgment, a lack of peace, and attack. And so if those things are operant in how you're judging your daily life, judgment, a lack of peace, or a sense of needing to attack something, then you can bet that you're listening to what the Course would say is a voice that will lead to pain.
Yes.
So anyway.
We'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.